Of a triplet. Depends on which triplet, right? Quarter note triplets usually do what?
Speed up.
Most of the time, quarter note triplets speed up. Eighth note triplets usually slow down. Okay? It's all about understanding tendencies. If you can figure out what your tendencies are for yourself, that's key. And the second thing is to figure out the tendencies for your ensemble. Standing in front of the ensemble here, you have very different tendencies than if I were to stand in front of the ensemble teaching my high school. Okay? Very different tendencies. There are some rhythms that fall into pretty much relatively the same category in terms of normally these rhythms almost always do this. Okay? So it's understanding that as well as you start teaching your ensemble or your own ensemble. What do they have a tendency to do? Do they drag the dotted quarter followed by the eighth? Okay? Do they rush? Almost all players, when they see consecutive 16th notes, if it's slurred, what happens? Okay, they fly through it. They fly through it. Now, if it's articulated, it's a different story. Especially what? For brass players. Brass players usually do what? The 16ths that are tongue. Slow them down. Right. Count them like a jack. Okay? So rhythmic sensitivity, in a sense, is understanding your own sense of pulse and time, and also understanding the tendencies of the ensembles that you are teaching and you're conducting. Whereas a metronome with a marching band, I think, is very effective. Okay? Running a metronome with your concert ensemble, you should do very limited. Okay? Maybe use a metronome to do rhythmic exercises. Alright? Put the metronome, set the metronome on quarter notes, but tell them the quarter notes are upbeats. And they have to play quarter notes on the downbeats. Okay? Little things like that. But don't plug in a doctor beat with your concert ensemble and turn it on your marches in 120, turn on the doctor beat, and let the doctor beat go the whole time. Okay? Use it in concert ensemble very sparingly, but use it. I use it on the podium all the time as a reference for me, to make sure that I'm where I'm supposed to be. And if we were playing with absolutely horrible time in a section, I may would use it once or twice, but not something that you should do every single time. All right, questions, comments? No? All right, Dan, what time is it?
It is 8:40.
Fantastic. All right. Good. Let's talk about my favorite part of what we do, and it's the music. Okay? Anyone? History, wind ensemble, or wind band? Daniel, what's the history of the wind band?
I mean, it started with the army bands, right?
Okay, if we're going to say,
military bands.
maybe, all right, I'll give you this country. Anyone else? History of the wind band.
Stemmed from small brass bands originally.
What do you mean
Okay.
it goes to this country? Like,
Honey?
what do you mean it goes to this country?
In America, it stemmed from
Oh,
army bands.
Yeah.
Is that not? You mean, okay. I didn't know you meant everywhere.
Because I know, like in Western Europe, they're big on brass bands. They kind of stem from that there.
Okay? History of the wind band. Anyone else? What I'm getting at is I don't see this book. Okay? If I don't see this book, or that you have this book, that means you haven't read. So it means you probably don't have a lot to offer in terms of discussion. Okay? But just from a general perspective, anyone else? History of the wind band? Jeremy?
I think in the book they talked about like the advances in the orchestra, like Mozart, and then with the Beethoven, they added more players, and then composers just started writing for more.
Okay. You mentioned two specific names that we're getting there.
Berlioz, is that?
Okay, there's another one. Who else? Anyone else? Wagner? Okay. Did they write specific music for wind band?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Wind band.
Whole stroke the first, or at least first piece for
Comes a little later. Comes a little later. But we're talking, let's date pre-20th century. Pre-20th century. So that could be anywhere between antiquity and small chamber ensembles. Absolutely. Anyone else? He does have a piece for winds.
Just great you're following the category of the earlier 20th century.
He's right at the 20th century.
Okay.
All right. I cannot stress for you enough. I can't. Some of you have this book, but I cannot stress two things. Okay. One, if an instructor, I know spending money is not on the top of your list. It was on my list in undergrad, at least spending money on books. But this book is important for you to have. If you're going to teach band, this book is important. There's another book out. Actually, there's another book that came out last year. Second part to this is band or wind band in the 21st century. So it's 2000 on. Okay? But I cannot explain to you how important it is for you to have this book and actually read what's in this book. Because there's a lot of information in here that I can't get to in 6 classes that you need to have a background knowledge of. From the standpoint of as you teach and understanding where you come from and where your career comes from, but also in the standpoint of if you choose to eventually go on and do any type of master's work, whether it be in performance or whether it be conducting or whatever the case may be, and you set yourself into a master's program, which anything that has to do with band, music ed, conducting, this is, literature, wind band history is going to be a significant portion of it. Okay? All right, so prior to the 20th century, there's a lot that actually happens to contribute to the development of the wind band. Brass bands, we'll get there in just a second, but brass bands is a huge part of it, especially in the late 19th century. But let's go back. Battisti talks about that the wind band comes from 2 primary mediums. One is the military band, okay? But the military band was essentially, the military band was peripheral to history, is what he says, through the music of people like Mozart and Beethoven and Wagner and Berlioz, okay? And the second way that he traces it is from the music of Berlioz and Mozart and Beethoven through performance in the military band. Okay? So there is extreme, there's 2 ways to look at it, but they both tie in together, which we'll talk about in a little bit, just a second. Primarily, anything before the 20th century, the wind band was considered for entertainment value, civic functions, public functions, ceremonies locally, nationally, celebrations, those type of things primarily. It wasn't until the 20th century, and it hasn't been until the 20th century. In the last 115 years, okay, coming on 115 years, that the wind band is considered a significant contribution to music culture. Okay, and we're talking in terms of classic music culture. So when you think about it, in the span of music, the wind band is relatively what? New and young. Very new and very young. Now, 100 years is a long time. Okay? But we're still on the cusp of really discovering what the possibility of the wind band is, especially within the last 50 plus years. Okay? Alright, so prior to the 20th century, alright? In the 19th century, early 19th century, late 18th century, these names contributed to the wind band development. Okay? Gabrielli. Okay? What's Gabrielli known for?
Antiphonal music.
Antiphonal music, brass music. Okay? The music he wrote for the brass choirs or the choirs at St. Mark's Cathedral. Okay? Anybody know Gabrielli's dates, roughly? 1557, 1612. Okay? Really late 16th century, early 17th century. Jean-Baptiste Lully, who is he? What nationality? French composer. Wrote opera. He was important in music history for another reason. Anybody know why? It has to do with opera. One of the first operas, but he developed a style called the French Overture. Dotted rhythms. Okay? And the French Overture was very significant because it led to essentially the development of the overture before the opera. Okay? One of the first major French overtures was Handel's Messiah. Alright? But Lully, 1632 to 1687. King Louis XIV had infantry bands, military bands in French, military bands, oboes, bassoons, very limited instrumentation, but he still contributed to writing music for them. Henry Purcell, nationality? English. 1659 to 1695. Okay? One of his most significant contributions to wind music is the funeral music for Queen Mary. He wrote original music for the death of Queen Mary. It was written for trumpets, trombones, timpani. There's a very, very outstanding transcription of that by Stephen Stuckey for chamber ensemble. I mean, it's fantastic. Handel. Okay, Handel, 1685, 1759. Music for royal fireworks, 1749. Handel, 1685 to 1759. Music for royal fireworks, 1749. Music for royal fireworks was essentially this huge wind piece, huge small orchestra piece that was designed to be played in the middle of. No, that's the water music. Never mind, I'm going the wrong way. Anyway, instrumentation. Okay, mostly woodwind and brass. Huge though. 40 trumpets, 20 French horns, 16 oboes. It's almost as bad as 9 flutes. 16 bassoons. Check this out. 8 pair of timpani. Now, timpani in the 17th century, not the same timpani that we know today, but 8 pairs of timpani, 12 side drums. Okay, that's the instrumentation for. Yeah, that's the instrumentation for royal fireworks. Music for royal fireworks. 40 trumpets, 20 French horns, 16 oboes, 16 bassoons, 8 timpani, 12 side drums, which is essentially snare drum. Okay. All right. So there's some major pieces for winds dating back to the 17th century and before. Okay? About the 18th century. Okay? 18th century, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, many others wrote music called harmony music. And harmony is spelled different than what you're going to spell it. Okay? Harmony music. Okay, it's essentially music for octets. Okay, small chamber ensemble music. Octets, nonettes, septets, etc. Sextets. All 3 composers, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, all wrote significant works. We're talking serenades, partitas, divertimentes. What are divertimentes?
I don't know.
Okay? This is stuff from music history. Divertimentes, they're like light, very jovial, very, fun pieces, essentially, for instrumentation, whatever instrumentation. Divertimenti, Mozart wrote many for string players. Okay? So it wasn't necessarily just wind band significant. Okay? But they all wrote. Is that 852? They all wrote for winds. Okay? Mozart. Okay? Mozart's dates, anyone?
He died in 1750.
was born in 1756. 1791. Okay. Okay, Mozart. He wrote 3 serenades. In the span of 2 years, 1781, 1782, he wrote 3 serenades for wind instruments. Okay, the first one was Serenade number 10 in B flat. The Gran Partita. G-A-R-N-P-A-R-T-I-T-A. Is anyone familiar with this piece? Has anyone ever heard of this piece?
I heard it, we probably would
This was on listening exams for music history last year. I don't know.
Doubt this was probably on there. Okay, he wrote Serenade number 11 in E flat. And then his last Serenade number 12 for winds was in C minor. And just so you know, all the stuff I'm giving you is stuff that you want to have somewhere and keep in case you do eventually go on to graduate school and do anything with it, because this is all stuff that will come back, I promise. Okay? So 1781, 1782, 3 serenades, all written for anywhere between 9 and 13 players. Okay? Serenade number 10, the one in B flat, was written for 13 players. Okay? Serenade number 10 in B flat is considered by some to be the greatest piece for winds ever written.
Let's hear it.
We're going to. Okay? To give you a little background about the piece. Anton Stadler, anybody know who that was? Okay, who was he?
Nick Money.
I mean, I
I'm
know.
not talking about Salieri. Hey, Anton Stadler was a very prominent clarinet player, one of...
Stadler? Or Stadler? Who did you say?
Anton Stadler. Stadler, yeah.
Okay, so
Not Salieri.
he was, he taught Mozart.
Right, okay. He's also a very virtuosic clarinet player during Mozart. Mozart wrote a piece. Stadler wanted a piece written for him to perform. Don't necessarily know what function it was.
It extended the range of the clarinet, like for an extended range clarinet, and they couldn't play a lot. When they found the piece, a lot of people couldn't play it because it was for extended range. But then they found out it was written for a different instrument, like a basso clarinet or something, like completely different instrument. So they had to redo it.
Yeah. So Mozart wrote this piece that was originally supposed to be intended for just a short, fun type of piece to show off his ability to play the instrument, and eventually turned into an hour plus very in-depth piece. As I said, considered by some to be one of the greatest pieces for winds ever written. Okay. Total of 7 movements. Okay. I would love to study this piece just in depth with you all, but because it's fantastic. 7 movements total. Written for, let me see if I remember the instrumentation off the top of my head. 2 oboes, 2 bassoon, 2 basset horn, 2 horns. Actually, 4 horns, excuse me. Contrabassoon or contrabass instrument. What am I missing? I think that's it. Yeah, 2, 4, 6. Yep, that's it. Okay? Alright, so Serenade number 10 in B flat. This is the opening. How many of you have Spotify? Okay, it's a fantastic. You can find anything.
Sure.
It's for free. Find it, you can find anything. Okay? It's a little bit of opening. We're going to play a little bit of each one. This is the introduction. It's going to be an introduction, then allegro. This is Adagio allegro written in sonata form. It's going to have minuet, 2 trios, very different for the time. Again, there's a lot about this piece that makes it really, really good. There's a theme and variations. There's a romance. piece. Adagio. And he goes back to another minuet trio. Very different than the first one. And there's a romance, Adagio, Allegro part. We'll get to the Allegro part. You got theme and variations. This is part one of the variations. You have a finale, fast finale. Well, it's not. There's nothing. There's no transcription that I know of for band.
Really?
It's chamber winds. I would love to play some of that, but that's pretty significant music. Now, when ensembles play, you don't have to play all 7 movements. Some conductors pick and choose what they play. You don't have to play all 7 movements. But I'm telling you, we could spend a semester just studying that piece. It's fantastic. If you have never listened to the whole thing, do so. Again, there are many things. Classical period. Composers usually only wrote 1 minuet, 1 trio. He did 1 minuet, 2 trios twice. Okay? So there's a lot of significance about the piece to make it one of the greatest pieces, I think. So Mozart, Franz Kromer, Krommer. Okay. 1759 to 1831. Another harmony music composer. He wrote several octets, partitas, F major, E flat, B flat, C, all part of the same thing. Here's one example. All different instrumentation, but chamber music for sure. This is the partita in B flat. So this is from. Not the greatest recording. Here's another example.
Is that it?
I don't know. Red Balloon made two times.
Well, they made.
And McGinty.
Hey, Beethoven wrote 2 significant works for chamber winds. One is the octet in E flat. One is the rondino in E flat. Octet, rondino. Here's a little bit of the octet. little idea, again, of what it sounded like. Essentially, what we know to what has become the modern wind band developed out of the French Revolution, out of the military bands of the French Revolution, the late 1700s. A guy by the name of Wilhelm Welpart was very instrumental in terms of developing and expanding instrumentation at the beginning of the 18th century, or excuse me, beginning of the 19th century. Composers like Gossec, Francois Gossec, Gossec, Charles Catel, Catel, both French composers, composed some marches, some significant music for French military band at the beginning of the 19th century. Anyway, we see expanded instrumentation in these bands, this part of history, but more importantly is Welpart and other leaders of these bands start to incorporate transcriptions of Mozart and Beethoven and the classical era composers into their music. You know, overtures from the classical era, opera excerpts from the classical period, all become a standard part of the wind band's repertoire. And what's going to happen is we'll see as we get that starts to eventually evolve and become a significant part to the early wind band history, okay? Transcriptions. And so across Europe, again, even though these bands are starting to develop, get bigger instrumentation, they're still primarily used for civic functions, military functions, national occasions, social occasions, etc. But most importantly, very little of the music they played was original music for band. Okay? Very little at this time. Okay? 19th century. So 19th century composers. They composed music for wind band, and this is original music. 1824, Mendelssohn. Okay? Wrote a piece, Notturno for harmony, essentially harmony music piece. Flute, 2 clarinets, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, trumpet, bass horn. 1 flute, 2 clarinets, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, trumpet, bass horn. He expanded the instrumentation, and in 1836 he produced a larger work for wind orchestra called Overture for Wind Band. Okay? Overture for Wind Band. Very, very prominent piece, still played considerably, quite a lot today. Others, 19th century. Berlioz, Wagner. Extremely important in terms of developing music for wind band. The 2 pieces in particular that they're responsible for help to develop the larger and build it in terms of larger sense, help expand the instrumentation. Berlioz in 1840 composed his Grand Symphony, Opus 15. Wagner in 1844, Trauer Symphony. Both were scored for outdoor ceremony, so it was large instrumentation, outdoor wind band. Wagner's Trauer Symphony was written for Weber's, essentially for his entombment, his death and his entombment in 1844. So here's a little bit of each one of those. And both are very romantic in terms of their style. Here's the Berlioz.